Our next speaker is Dr. Sayantan Majumdar, or Monty. Monty is an assistant research professor of hydrologic scientists and remote sensing at the Desert Research Institute in Reno, Nevada. Earlier, he was a postdoc fellow at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Colorado State University and received his PhD in geological engineering from Missouri S&T. Monty is a computational hydrologist with expertise in remote sensing, geospatial data science, and machine learning. His primary research is focused on irrigation water use estimation through integrated remote sensing and data-driven methods, for which he has been collaborating with multiple agencies across the U.S., including USGS, Kansas Geological Survey, Nevada DWR, Oregon WRD, and Arizona DWR. Please help me welcome Monty.
Thanks, Garshaw, for the introduction. So, yeah, I'm Monty, and I recently joined DRI. So this work, it's basically an aggregation of what I did over the past 5 years or so that I've been in the hydrology domain. So let's get into it. And this is about regional and field scale estimates of groundwater withdrawals using remote sensing and climate data. So just a primer on groundwater facts on groundwater, which you probably all know. So it's the largest source of liquid fresh water and provides 40% of the water for irrigated agriculture worldwide. And it's a drinking source for more than 2 billion people. And a lot of this groundwater source, it's heavily stressed. And these are just a couple of photos showing center pivot irrigation systems in Nevada and Arizona. So let's talk about groundwater withdrawals. So over here I have three figures. Photos which I took during field work that I went last year. And so the first one is an abandoned well with a nice host. It's a black widow spider, so you should be careful while going out in the field. And then we have Murphy Gardner and Justin, he is not visible there, inspecting a livestock well on the bottom left over there. And then this is what my research will talk about. This is what we are trying to estimate, groundwater pumping. And this is just a single field in Desert Valley, Nevada, irrigating alfalfa, and this goes on 24/7. And so one of the things I like about hydrology and remote sensing in general is that you can go to these fields and experience the evaporative cooling that we see in our remote sensing data. And so this really motivated me to keep contributing to this domain. And so this is what we see from space. So this is in nearby Winnemucca, Nevada, where we have multiple circles popping up, as you see. And then this is a zoomed in view. And so thanks to Murphy and Justin for taking me to a field work. It was really fascinating for me, and I got to understand a lot about the fields. So one of the big questions is, how big is a pivot? We all see these circles in OpenET when you go to the Data Explorer. So each pivot can be, like the diameter of this can be 800 meters or half a mile in length. And these are like hundreds of these are in the middle of nowhere in each basin in Nevada. And there are thousands across the state, just in Nevada. And so when we compare it to the size of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas campus, just 3 circles are enough to cover the entire campus. And then just one pivot is enough to cover a golf course. And then we have people complaining everywhere about golf courses, and no one talking about this irrigation, these pivots. So what are the negative impacts of overpumping, and why are we interested in estimating this? So this is a really nice article that my colleague Fahim over here, he led, published in Nature Communications, and this shows the effect of groundwater overpumping across the world. Showing subsidence and groundwater storage loss. And China and United States are the leading nations in where we see a lot of groundwater storage loss happening, and some of it is permanent. So in my research, I predominantly use remote sensing data sets as well as other hydroclimate data. So here, these are just a few of the data sets that I use in my research. And so, of course, you are all familiar with OpenET, but there are other data sets like GRACE. Then there was this MODIS-based CBOP that Dr. Gabriel Sena developed earlier, which now uses the Landsat-based in the OpenET platform. And then we have other land use data from USDA and also Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 satellites, and previously the MODIS and also like the MODIS land cover data and GPM-based precipitation estimates. So I aggregated, in literature I found there are 3 methods to estimate groundwater withdrawals. The first one is through process-based models. This is similar to the Central Valley hydrologic model developed by Claudia Font, which uses the ModFlow farm package. Then there is this deterministic methods, which uses the dual crop coefficient approach, relying on potential crop ED, effective precipitation, and irrigation efficiencies. And this is the same approach as in the FAO 56 by Rick Allen and Justin and Rick Allen. And then recently there have been a lot of studies showing data-driven approaches, particularly with the increasing amounts of remote sensing data and also other hydroclimate data availability. So I don't know why the slide is like this, but when I made it, the S wasn't there. So the remote sensing products that we use are proxies for the water balance components, and it's difficult to estimate the recharge, groundwater inflow, outflow, and surface water withdrawals. And so, and also the remote sensing data sets, they come at various spatiotemporal scales. So these are some of the broad challenges that that come when we are dealing with the regional scale groundwater withdrawals. And so here I'll just briefly go over my past studies that relied on MODIS-based ET, and then I'll jump into the OpenET ET-based estimates. So this was in Kansas, where we compared the total groundwater withdrawals across the state over the 5 groundwater management districts using a random forest model. This is a semi-automated approach, and we see like the actual and the predicted groundwater pumping rasters. These agree quite well. And then when we compare it to the overall state level data and also to the GRACE data, we see we have good correlation. However, one interesting thing is that in Kansas, you see the actual withdrawal values, they sort of reduce after 2013. So that's when the local enhanced management practices were developed in Kansas, and that reduced the irrigation withdrawals. And so our remote sensing data sets, they couldn't pick up that signal. So next up, I tried to use this approach in Arizona, where we have good data in the active management areas and the irrigation non-expansion areas, highlighted in that red. So over here, we don't have groundwater withdrawal data across the state, which are shown in that shaded gray regions. So we don't have meter data there. But with our approach, we can predict groundwater withdrawals in unmetered basins and sort of look at how subsidence plays a role here. So when we look at the groundwater withdrawals in unmetered basins and in regions where land subsidence are happening, for example, the Wilcox Basin in southeastern Arizona, we see that we can develop this sort of ratios, which shows the fraction of withdrawals resulting in aquifer storage. And so in the Wilcox Basin, it's almost like the 15% of the withdrawals, it's resulting in aquifer storage loss. And this subsidence was mapped using the interferometric SARD with the help of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. So next up, this was a work with the US Geological Survey. I spent almost 3 years working on it, and here we estimate annual and monthly groundwater withdrawals across the Mississippi alluvial plain using different predictor data sets and remote sensing. And we also have the USGS real-time flow meter data available in in different states, which we use to disaggregate the annual estimates to the monthly scale. And so what's interesting, an interesting observation that we found here was that in high water use regions, so these are all the rice fields in Arkansas. So we have high water use, but the coefficient of variation is lower. However, when we move on to the lower water use areas, we see the coefficient of variation to be high. And this is possibly due to crop rotations in these regions, because rice is mostly flood irrigated over here. And another interesting thing is that Sorry. These regions also irrigate fish culture or like aquaculture, and we could also see the water use trends for each crops. And so that's why the heading crop specific groundwater use. And so we see over here rice and aquaculture, these are heavy drivers of irrigation water use, especially like aquaculture is primarily happening in the Mississippi and Arkansas. So now we move on to the field scale withdrawals using OpenET. So the main challenges over here is matching points of diversions or wells to the places of use, identifying the water source type, whether it's surface water or groundwater or mixed, creating and maintaining field boundaries, and the discrepancies in the metering data themselves. So for this, I looked into two study areas. One is Diamond Valley in Nevada, and the other one is Harney Basin in Oregon. Diamond Valley is entirely groundwater dependent, whereas Harney Basin has mixed surface water rights, including purely groundwater dependent systems and mixed water systems. And almost 26,000 acres of irrigated lands are there in Diamond Valley, and for Harney Basin, it's almost 96,000 acres. And alfalfa and grass are the main crops that are irrigated here. Yeah, so the primary data sets over here are the actuality from OpenET, the grid met precipitation, ET demands derived effective precipitation, and then the irrigation data, that is the field boundaries and the water source type. So the first challenge is mapping the wells to the fields. So this is a very simple scenario where we have the places of use, that is the maximum extent to which a well can irrigate. And over here we have 3 places of use, and we have 4 fields. And then this is the simplest case where we have one well watering multiple fields, or one well watering one field. And so we can group these fields together where we have a one-to-many mapping. But for cases where there is a many-to-many dependency, that's very difficult to figure out. And so we discard those fields in this study. And then the other thing is, why do we need to maintain the field boundary databases? And so this is the change of the field boundaries in Harney Basin, Oregon from 1991 to 2016. And so these are highly variable, as you see over time, and that's why maintaining this database is very important for water management. And then the water source type data. So this in mixed basins where we have different water rights, we have to identify which field is using which type of water. So over here we just use the groundwater dependent fields. So coming to the meter data, it seems like it's a very trivial thing. Just put some meters in the field and then you're all set. But it's not actually the case. The meter data can have discrepancies in themselves because sometimes these meters are switched and then the values have high discrepancies. So over here, we use the ratio between the groundwater pumping and the consumptive use, or the net ET. So this is the actuality of subtracted by the effective precipitation. And then we sort of discard the values which are 50% above, 50% below, or 150% above the consumptive use. And so when we model this using linear regression at the depth space, there is the volumes divided by the field areas. We find a good correlation, R square of 0.6 in Diamond Valley and around 0.5 in Harney Basin, with the slopes being 1.1 and 1.2. So the slopes are an estimate. The inverse of the slopes basically shows the irrigation efficiency, which I'll talk about in a while. And then we have these volume-based estimates. So one interesting thing to note here is that from 0.6 R square in the depth space, the volume space, we have R square of 0.87 or almost 0.9. And here also in Harney Basin, where the R square was 0.5 in the depth space, we have 0.88. So what's happening here? So the thing that's the reason behind this is bigger fields will have higher pumping and lower fields will have smaller pumping. So when you model this kind of irrigation withdrawals using OpenET, the modeling should happen at the depth space and not the volume space. Because if you use volume space, then you can just throw in the area as a predictor, and that will give you an R-square of 0.7 or something. But ultimately, we also need the volumes, because that's what goes into the groundwater models. And so when we plotted the basin reported volumes versus the estimated volumes, we end up with these plots, which shows that our estimates are quite good. In Diamond Valley 2018 and 2019, the model estimates are a bit lower because the metering program, although it kicked off in 2018, but it properly started in 2020, and they were using some assumed values in these 2 years. And then this red line is the net irrigation water requirements based pumping, and which is quite high. So obviously, we can't rely on just the potential ET based approach, because that's overestimating the pumping in this basin. So here is the thing about irrigation efficiency. Like I said, the slope, the inverse of the slope gives you the efficiency estimate, and in Diamond Valley we found it's around 92%, whereas in Harney Basin it's around 83%, and it aligns with the known center pivot irrigation system efficiencies. And finally, we did some comparisons of the consumptive use with the groundwater pumping. So in Diamond Valley, we find, like most of the models, the trends agree with the groundwater pumping, which is here. And then the OpenED ensemble gives the best metric. And also in Harney Basin, we find that the OpenED ensemble is performing the best. And so coming to the conclusions, the main conclusion is that the regression models, including the machine learning ones, can explain 50 to 80% variance in the pumping depths and 90% variance in the pumping volumes. And the OpenED ensemble produces the most consistent and accurate results. And also, like, our approach is providing a more systematic way of estimating groundwater withdrawals than conventional methods based on water right duties, potential crop ET, low quality meter readings, or assumed values. So finally, I would like to thank my colleagues, collaborators, and mentors across all these agencies, without whom I wouldn't have been able to perform this work. And thanks to the funding agencies for generously for their support. So thank you.
Thank you, Monty.